Hello again, everybody. So, last lesson, we prepared the first part of our project, the navbar section. We learned some of the navbar features using Bootstrap. Now, before we get into some of the other parts of the project, I do want to talk to you about the grid layout system in Bootstrap. We already talked about grid in the CSS lessons, and you know its logic. But let's talk about what we can do while preparing grid with Bootstrap and then continue to prepare our project. So we're going to see that it's much easier to create responsive sites with Bootstrap, and you're going to be able to kick back and enjoy. So let's start the coding part and take a look at what we can do in the grid system. Now, naturally, I'm not going to want the codes that we prepare in this lesson to be in the same place as the HTML file that we prepared the project in. So I prepared a new HTML file and continue from there. So first, let's add Bootstrap and jQuery as links to our HTML file. I'll also write grid layout in the title section of the HTML file. Now, I'm sure you remember from the CSS lessons, responsive web pages with a grid were very easy, and it's going to be even easier using the grid layout in Bootstrap. All right, so why don't I just shut up and have a look at the grid system on the Get Bootstrap site. So first, let's click the documentation, and then we click on the layout. From here, click on grid. So here we see the divs using special classes of Bootstrap. And as you can see, there is an outermost container and a row and the 3 columns that it covers. Now, when you go down a little bit, we can see the grid options. And as this lesson progresses, we're going to explain what they mean, so don't worry about it. Now, here you see 2 rows of equal width and 2 columns in the first row, 3 columns in the second row. And then when you look a little closer, you see many grid features. So why don't we start writing the code in our HTML file, and let's see what each of the Bootstrap classes mean. So now I'm adding a div with container class, and I'm adding a div with row class in it. Then in this, I'm adding a div with call class. So we created a structure consisting of 1 row and 1 column. Now we add background color and border with style attribute to our column. And I'll write column in it. Now, when we look at it, there is a column that covers the entire screen width. So I'll add 1 more column next to that, and 2 equal columns are formed. Now, likewise, I can add 2 more columns in this row. A total of 4 equal columns gets built. Just like that. So now I want to create another line. And for that, I wrote a div with a row class, and in that I wrote a div where I use the call for class. Likewise, I added a different background color and border. And then when you look at that, we'll see a column that uses only 1/4 of the screen. That means it takes up 25% of the width of the screen, not the entire screen. And I'll explain all of this as we go along. So if you think of a single line as 12 pieces, and whatever width of this screen width we want, we just give it a number. So when you say call 6 instead of call 4, we specify the width of half the screen, because when we divide 12 by 6, it's half, right? Or when I say call 3, indicate a quarter of the screen width. Here, let me just write call 4 class again, and then add another column with call 2 here. And as you can see, the two columns covered half the screen width. So if we add another column with call 6 class, the width of the screen has been covered. However, when we make a change in the screen size here, we see that it is not responsive enough. So, how do you make the page responsive? Let's go back on over to the Bootstrap site, and let me show you a couple of tricks. So when we look at the grid options section here, it gives us some information about screen sizes. For example, when we say column D or column medium, it'll apply the size that we want to apply according to the tablet and larger screens. Or when we say call large for 960 pixels and above, it'll look the way that we want it to on laptops or bigger screens. On smaller screens, it's going to look different. So I think that we can understand that better with code. So I'll create a new row in our HTML file. I create a column with different background in it. So I'm just writing the call MD6 class here. So when you look at it, a new column that covers half the width of our page has been created. So I'll create another column in the same way. And now we can see two columns side by side. So you can't see the difference yet, but when we shrink the screen size and we reach a size smaller than the tablet size, as you can see, the second column scrunches down, and now both columns cover 100% of the screen width. So while these columns appear upside down on smartphones, they will appear side by side on tablets or computers. So how do we adjust the number of different columns in different sizes? Well, here we can use the call small, call medium, and call large classes on the same div. So let's create a new row and create a column inside with a different background color. And I'm adding the column large 3 class here. So this means that computers or computers with larger screens will cover a quarter of the screen. So I'll add call medium 4 into the same div. So here this says a third of the screen on a tablet or larger screens. So now if I add the column small 6 class, it will maximize half the screen of the phone. So I create a total of 4 columns in this row in the same way. So when we look at the changes, we can see that 2 are side by side on the phone screen, 3 columns on a slightly larger screen, and we see 4 columns side by side on the computer size screen. So in other words, by using these classes in the same div, we can easily get that view that we want, right? So that's the grid logic in Bootstrap, and you can see how it can really speed up your process. So my suggestion here is when you're confused, you're always going to want to go to the Bootstrap site and just review the documentation section if you get stuck or whatever, if you want to dive in a little deeper, because you can always find the explanation of what you want to do right here. So we're going to be using the grid system features even more when we get deeper into our project. But for now, why don't you go have some practice, maybe explore the documentation a little further, and I'll see you in the next lesson.